Greetings, America. Welcome. It is Friday. It is chilly here in eastern coastal southern Carolina, I guess. Southeastern coastal Carolina, whatever. Uh, Again, you could call this an episode of Let's Talk. Real quick, something I want to put out there, and hopefully I can get a decent amount of feedback. Um, So I was just listening to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, and I've listened to the Dave Rubin podcast, the Rubin Report, and I've listened to Ben Shapiro, and obviously everybody's talking about this GameStop stuff and whatnot. So I think that's been done enough. Um, but interestingly enough, listening to Dinesh D'Souza and some of his guests that he spoke with, or some of the people whose videos he posted, brought me to like a central theme. And that it's one that I've spoken about before, but I've never made a major topic of discussion. So here it goes. As I've mentioned before, um, currently they take on the role of leadership, as in whether they self appointed themselves or they self anointed or self labeled, but the people that are elected either in the Senate or in the Congress are not leaders, they are lawmakers. More importantly, if you go back to the founding of the country and what their intended purpose was, and as far as I know still is, they are elected preservers. In other words, when the country was formed, regardless of some of the impurities as far as how everybody was treated, the idea and the concept was that everybody was essentially equal and that we were all born with a divine sense of given rights and given freedoms. And it was the intention to form a body politic, a government to protect and preserve these rights and these freedoms. And as we evolve over time, the whole point is in the Congress, these congressmen and women represent a very specific geographical region in a state. States like California have 53 congressional districts based on the census population. Um, I'm often curious if populations expand and contract due to current events, if that is subject to redistricting, um, because California has 53 districts, Texas has 34 districts, and then I think New York and trying to remember, it's either Illinois or Pennsylvania. One of them have like, or Florida maybe, have 27 districts. So you have a handful of states that are just ginormous. But I digress. Um, So, getting back on point, I had made the comment that these elected lawmakers, these elected preservers of our rights and our freedoms, I deny the concept of leadership because, leadership also means setting an example for others to follow. It means leadership. I don't think I need to expand upon that, and I don't think congressmen and congressmen and women senators are leaders. Uh, I think their intended profession is to preserve rights and freedoms that are inherently ours, and I think it's their duty to represent the people that elected them. Like when you take someone like Nancy Pelosi and whatnot, she is supposed to represent her district. And why am I saying all this? Why am I framing it in such a way like this? Because whether that was the intent of the Second Amendment or it was a byproduct of the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment, among other things, provides us the right to bear arms as well as the ability to formulate a well regulated militia. Now, the right to bear arms is essentially the the right to self defense. And as we know over time, state and local governments have put restrictions on certain on the ability to maintain that right. I think California has a single stack magazine policy where you can't have a double stack magazine, you can't have a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds of ammunition. But again, see, if you de-arm the populace, if you remove the populace right to defend themselves, then all you're essentially doing is ensuring your power, and progressing towards tyranny. So the right to bear arms gives us the right to defend ourselves from when government essentially oversteps its purview, when it steps out of bounds, when it exceeds its authority. See, and that's where I refuse to give them the mark of leadership. Now, let's be very clear. I'm not in any way, shape, or form attempting to condone, incite, or stimulate any kind of armed conflict. All I'm simply saying is this. One of the tenets in my belief behind the Second Amendment was to defend ourselves against our elected representatives should they reach a point where they are too powerful and they lack any and all humility. They are way too hubris, and they're borderline tyrannical, which is another way of saying at the end of the day, elected officials should fear us, and not necessarily for their life. Make sure you understand and make clear what it is I'm saying. Fear does not necessarily mean fear of being physically harmed or fear of losing one's life. More importantly, elected representatives should be fearful of losing their position for not doing their job. Now, some of these representatives have put in place a process in which they essentially run unopposed, where they have zero fear of being reelected, which I find astonishing. Um, and I feel like I want to go into greater examples, with individuals, but that's not really the point. The point is, you look at things now with the Capitol building, they're putting up barriers. I think they're increasing the physical security of, actually armed personnel. And it begs the question, and I'm putting this out there in the form of some questions because I already sent an email to Dinesh D'Souza now that he has a public email address where you can contact him and hopefully he'll respond. But what concerns me is now that they're increasing security around the Capitol building with armed guards and barriers and whatnot, it presents the question, if these people are elected by the public, then technically speaking, the Capitol building itself is public domain, open to the public, because it is inhabited by people who were elected by the public. Therefore, it is not a private establishment. It is not private property. It is not private whatsoever. Now, the confusion and possible conflation could be, well, it's considered federal land, therefore it's subject to federal laws. In which case, I open up the forum to discussion where I lack the knowledge, somebody could potentially educate me. Because, I'm looking at it from a very simplistic point of view. Inside of this building, on the land that the building sits, are people who are elected by the general populace. Whether you voted for them or not, within your state, within your district, they were elected, which means they are public servants. I have the physical capacity to walk into the Jacksonville Police Department. I have the physical capacity to walk into the Onslow County Sheriff's Department. Within that building, there are restrictive measures to protect not only the law enforcement personnel, but the people working there, as well as those who may potentially be incarcerated or in protective custody. So I understand all that, but I have the freedom and the ability to walk into these establishments and request an audience with a representative of the law enforcement community to exercise my grievances. In which case, is the Capitol building not in the same vein? Is the Capitol building not in the same confinements or restrictions or open to the public? In which case, I welcome the dialogue. I welcome somebody to respond, whether, in a video format or in a typed format, whether you want to argue the disposition or you want to enlighten me. I don't care. Because that opens up the question to the events that happened at the Capitol building on January 6th. Does it does it constitute a reconsideration? Because it's one thing for the people to enter the building if in fact it is considered public domain, because it is inhabited by publicly elected officials. It's another thing entirely if they're lawfully allowed to enter the public domain, but then what do they do afterwards? Okay, if they destroy property, if they make physical threats, if they make verbal threats with the intent to follow up physically, if there's anything that they've did that their conduct did, if I'm saying that right, I apologize. If anything within their conduct was unlawful, but entering the building itself was not unlawful, then I think that requires greater clarification, because the way that it's being framed right now is not doing anything to benefit us as a society. All that seems to be happening, just like it did over 100 years ago, is creating this massive division between people who may have left-leaning sympathies and people who have right-leaning sympathies, and then the people caught in the middle who don't really care. So, I think a proper understanding and a proper framing, an objective framing of, how things are. You ask me for my personal opinion, yes, elected preservers, elected officials should be fearful of their position, because you are a public servant elected by the populace. You should not be so hubris as to think that you are untouchable, and I don't mean in the physical sense, but I mean you should not be so hubris as to think that you are untouchable, that you are some sort of divine entity, regardless of your wealth. And it just reminds me of that scene from Fight Club. We take out your trash, we take care of your children, we cook your meals, we clean your house. We are as close to you as anybody can get. Don't F with us. But I digress. I think I've made my point. And if anybody's confused upon my point requiring greater clarification, you know what to do. Get involved in the conversation. Leave a comment. Maybe even a video comment. Otherwise, as far as the whole YouTube thing goes, you know the deal. Hit like if you like it. Hit dislike if you didn't like it. Subscribe if you want to subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when this is going to be putting on more videos. Otherwise, that's all I got. Y'all take care.